So I start on the ground and I spiral up. I do a hover, a pedal turn up to my assigned show altitude, which is roughly 1,000 feet AGL, and I start the show with a backflip, which is a zero airspeed loop. So you're in an out of ground effect hover, zero airspeed, and you just pull max power, and then over you go. It's like falling backwards out of a chair. Huh. So it's a very slow to develop loop, and that's where we unload the system. So it actually, you're about 0 to sometimes half a negative G as you come over the top of that backflip.
Let's see if the video's coming up here. All right, super. I think we are ready to roll. 3, 2, 1. Well, good morning. Welcome to Oshkosh. This is the Aviation News Talk broadcast, and this is our third and final live broadcast from the tent at, let's see, where are we? The Lightspeed tent. Good-looking headsets we're wearing here at the moment. We're broadcasting live on Facebook, and so I'm looking to see if anybody has any comments. Going to be watching. Go ahead and say hello to us, and we'll wave back to you. And the nice thing about Facebook Live is we can kind of read the comments and interact with folks anyway. But here on Aviation News Talk, we talk about general aviation. I'm your host, Max Trescott. Been a pilot for 40 years, and my goal as CFI is to inform you about things that can actually help you when you fly. I want to make sure that you stay safe out there. So let's see. I am going to mention that we have, if you're not listening to this live, obviously you're listening to episode 74. And this is the third podcast for live we have from AirVenture today. I want to get to Aaron Fitzgerald. Aaron is with the Red Bull team. And let me tell you a little bit about Aaron. He first served as a paratrooper in the Army in the 82nd Airborne Division, and then afterwards he began flight training down in Long Beach in 1994, earned his commercial certificate, immediately started flying news helicopters in the Los Angeles area, which to me sounds pretty exciting. Today he is the CEO of Airborne Images, and he has over 8,500 flight hours. He's worked all over North America on a variety of wild projects related to helicopter flying. Most recently, he's in the news because he has joined the Red Bull racing team. Now, not only is he performing aerobatics, but get this, he's doing it in a helicopter. So clearly we want to find out how is that possible? How can he do that? By the way, his debut air show was earlier in the week here at AirVenture, so obviously that worked out. We're happy that he's here with us. Aaron, welcome so much to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. This is my first time at Oshkosh, so to be able to sit here and talk with you and experience it all is just really overwhelming. I'm having a great time.
First Oshkosh, first helicopter aerobatics air show.
Yep, not my first air show, but my first time performing here at Oshkosh.
First at Oshkosh.
It's my first season. I'm a rookie. I'm the new guy.
Got it. Well, this place is just fantastic. So I've got to know, how did you get involved in aviation? Is this something that kind of started early on? Were you hooked as a kid on aviation?
It's all I ever wanted to do, yeah. I all my toys were helicopters when I was a kid. If I had something that wasn't, I would trade it for a helicopter-related toy. It's just all I ever wanted to do. There was no time where I decided, okay, I'm going to go after this. It was just always something I knew that I was going to pursue, and it's really the only thing that I ever wanted.
And so where'd you grow up, and what kind of helicopters were buzzing around that inspired you?
Well, that's interesting. I'm from Wenatchee, Washington, which is right in the center of the state, so it's right near the Cascade Range. And so there were a lot of logging helicopters and a lot of U.S. Forest Service firefighting helicopters. So I had a wealth of targets to enjoy as I was a kid. There was always helicopters flying over my hometown, and I always wanted to fly. And in those days, it was mostly Hueys doing all the work. So all the Vietnam-era Hueys that were painted up for logging companies or for the U.S. Forest Service were constantly going back and forth over my house, and I was just watching like everybody still does today.
Now, I bet you remember your first helicopter ride. Tell us about that.
The first time was on a tour. I was 14 years old, so I wasn't born into an aviation family, but they knew how much I wanted it. So when I was 14, my dad sprung for a tour, and it was in San Francisco off the pier. They used to run tours off of there. Yeah. So I got to go on one of those, and that was a big thrill.
That's beautiful. So you looked at Alcatraz and Golden Gate Bridge. And
that's funny. No, everybody else was. They were all looking out at the scenery, and I was watching the pilot's hands, and I was watching the instruments, trying to figure everything out. I couldn't tell you what San Francisco looked like from the air after that tour at all. But I can tell you what a 206 Jet Ranger looked like, because that's all I was looking at.
And you probably already knew exactly how the controls worked, and if the pilot suddenly slumped over, you were ready to jump up there and save the day?
I would not have saved the day, but I would have tried, yeah. I knew what everything was called, but I didn't have any idea how to operate one, obviously.
Yeah, I think as pilots, anytime we're on board commercial operations, like, if the pilot gets sick, just call me.
That's the dream, right? Is there a pilot on board?
Yeah, exactly. That will help out. So tell us about the Army. What kinds of things did you end up doing there?
Well, I was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne, so I didn't fly helicopters in the Army. I was an artillery guy, so I was a cannon cocker, they call us. It's not a glamorous job, but I'm really proud to have done it. The artillery guys are kind of a separate breed, so I'm proud to have been one of those. I wasn't in for a very long time. That was during the first Gulf War.
Okay.
They offered a 2-year contract, so I took that. I went in, served my time, and got out.
Right.
Started flying.
Okay. And so you started, it sounds like flying lessons after that. Tell us about flight training.
Flight training was in Long Beach, California, which is part of the greater metropolitan Los Angeles area. So very saturated airspace to learn to fly in, which turned out to be a good thing because I ended up working in that same airspace for a lot of years. So it's good. I think it's good. Well, for me, it was good to learn in a very busy environment.
Indeed. You know, I learned to fly in a very rural part of Pennsylvania. When I moved to San Francisco, I was scared to death. But now it's, you know,
the first time you look at that chart, you're going, oh no.
Well, the first time I was in the air, it's like, I'm a private pilot. I don't think so. Please take back the certificate. So you were doing news. Tell us about some of the interesting things that happened as a news helicopter pilot in Los Angeles.
Well, it's a lot of what you would expect. We did a whole bunch of car chases and a whole bunch of brush fires out there, but you see everything. I did it for full time for about 9 years. So at the end of that period, you've seen 100 car chases, you've seen floods, fires, shootings, everything. You see kind of everybody's worst day. You see that from the air over and over again. So there's parts of the job that are just spectacular and beautiful. You know, you see the sunset from the air every night. A lot of days you see the sunrise from the helicopter, you see the sunset from the helicopter over a beautiful city. We got the ocean and the mountains out there. So there's a lot of that. But of course there was a lot of the, downside of humanity stories too, shooting, stuff like that.
Right.
But I really loved it. Being able to fly every day over a huge city like that was just such a great opportunity and a great way to really learn and kind of hone my craft as a pilot.
So tell me about what a typical day was like. How many hours are you in the air? How many times you were up and down? What were some of the routine parts of that job?
The only thing routine is that you report to the same place every day. After that, anything can happen. You might end up, 100 miles north in the mountains on a fire. You might not fly at all. You might. I did it before there was internet in wide use, if you can believe that. So we read a lot of magazines on the slow days, but mostly a typical day, you'd fly a couple of hours per day. And, if we were in a ratings period, you'd fly more than that. You're just up cruising around. So it was a lot of variety and a lot of really, really great flying. I flew the AS350, the A-Star most of the time. So I spent a lot of hours hovering out of ground effect at 0 airspeed looking down at something.
Typically, how high were you when you're zooming around the freeways?
Anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 feet usually. And then there's some corridors under the LAX Class Bravo complex where you have to get lower. One of the transitions is 150 feet AGL, if you can believe that. Wow. And then one of them's 900 down a freeway. But typically we'd be 1,000 to 1,500. You don't want to be too low because it just makes too much noise, and we're up there all day. So we tried to be neighborly and fly high.
Well, you obviously had to work closely with your colleagues that were also flying news. How many helicopters would you end up over a particular event at a time? Usually
there's 2 or 3. Over a big fire, there might be as many as 15 or 20 helicopters, but that includes everything. That's, air attack, the firefighting helicopters, all the media helicopters, the still photography helicopters. When I started, there were a lot of traffic helicopters as well, the radio guys. But they don't do that so much with helicopters anymore in Los Angeles. I was just going to talk about that because same thing. We used to have helicopters, flying traffic. We had fixed wing flying traffic. None of that anymore. So obviously, a couple of things have happened. They can now get traffic information through internet kinds of collection sources. Plus, the broadcast industry is just not getting the same kind of revenue, certainly in the radio industry. I think that's probably true in television. Are there fewer news helicopter hours being flown now than there were when you were flying? I don't think so. I think those guys are at it just as hard as we were. I see there's a bunch of them based at the helicopter or at the airport where I'm based at Whiteman Airport in Los Angeles. And those guys, they look like they're flying just as much or more than we did when I was doing it. There are fewer. They've combined a couple of operations for efficiency, but they don't seem to be slowing down. That's for sure. Any particularly unusual things that happened when you were flying news, or really funny things where you said nobody will ever believe this? Yeah, it's too many to mention. Anything from naked people on the freeway to, anything. You name it, we saw it. One interesting story. We're here at AirVenture and EAA. They have a B-17 called Aluminum Overcast, right? And one day they were on final approach into Van Nuys, and we were close by. And I said, hey, this will be great. We'll shoot this B-17 landing. And it'll be like our weather shot. The weatherman can talk over this beautiful video of aluminum overcast coming into land. And they came in and they got about halfway down the runway and the gear folded up and it's flopped on its belly live on TV. And everyone said, how did you know that was going to happen? Well, I'm an experienced aviator. Yes. Or no one knew that was going to happen. But yeah, that was quite a surprise. It was really sad to see that thing flop down onto the runway. But interesting that I happened to be there.
Sometimes you get lucky, right?
Yeah, I hate to say that was a lucky day for anybody. But
well, that's a really good point. Well, actually, I think that's probably true of us as aviators. Those of us who survive, sometimes it's luck. Were there any points in your career where you kind of think, wow, if I hadn't been lucky, I might not be here?
Yeah, I mean, flying in saturated airspace like Los Angeles, there's been the occasional, I wouldn't say near miss, but you've got 10,000 hours, right?
I do.
Of course, there's been a time where somebody came by so close where the first thing you feel is exhilaration that you're still alive. You don't even have time to be scared. Whoa, that was close. And there's been a bunch of those, particularly at night over Los Angeles.
Okay.
But nothing really scary. We did have an engine failure once, but that got it on the ground. Okay, no problem.
Okay. Well, that's good. Do you find when you're flying at night, it's a little harder to try to figure out how to avoid other aircraft with their bright lights?
Today, yes. As I get older, my eyes aren't as good at night. When I was younger, flying around at night, I didn't understand what the problem was because I could see fine, no problem. But now I do understand the problem, and yes, it is harder now. But I don't do that as much anymore. You know, in my current capacity, I pretty much only fly in the daylight hours.
Right. Okay. And I know there have been some accidents where planes that saw each other ended up hitting each other at night because it just, even though you can see the lights further away and have more time to avoid it, for whatever reason,
depth perception, right?
Yeah, you don't quite understand exactly what their direction of travel is or what their height is. And so then it's really, really tough to avoid unless you start doing that early on. I just read a day or two ago that there's a shortage of helicopter pilots. What's going on with the industry that they need more helicopter pilots?
Well, I've heard that a few times over my career. I've been flying since 1994, and there's been a few times where there's been an ebb and flow of the demand for helicopter pilots, and I'm hearing that a lot these days. I'm not in a hiring position, and I'm not looking for pilots, so I don't know from a personal perspective if there really is a shortage. I do know for a fact that there are a lot of guys jumping from rotary wing into men and women jumping from rotary wing into the airlines because they do have a pilot shortage. So a lot of people are transitioning out of helicopters into fixed wing for that reason.
I see. Okay. Well, so anybody who's listening who's thinking about a career in aviation, people always kind of think, I think, more so about the airlines than they do helicopters. What are some of the advantages of being a working helicopter pilot versus being an airline pilot, which we hear about all the time?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the glamour job. Everybody wants to be an airline pilot, and it's a great job, and those guys are amazing, and they're the top of the heap. For me, I really like flying helicopters, and that's all I want to do. I just really enjoy being down low. I love a machine where I can go any speed. I can get as low as I want to when I'm over. Just this morning, we were out over the lake. I had a VIP passenger on board, and we did the aerobatic routine, and then I was down looking at a duck blind out in the middle of the lake. And you can't do that in an airliner. I like to be right down in the dirt, and I like a ground-oriented mission. So for me, helicopters is the perfect answer.
That's awesome. You and I like the same thing, by the way. I'm typed in several jets, and I would much rather fly. These days, I spend all my time in Cirrus. Close to the ground, nice I can watch the world go by. I've got great technology, the safety of the parachute and all those kinds of things. So, yeah, to me, I think airline careers are awesome, and I'm happy that people enjoy them. But man, keep me closer to home and close to the ground.
Yeah, it's. I look at today. There was an airliner taking off. I think it was a 757 going out, and everybody stops what they're doing and watches it go by because it's so cool watching those huge airliners. And I respect that the guys who fly them, and that looks really cool. But I like my decathlon too. I like to go slow and low and smell the grass.
Obviously, you've had some aerobatic experience before jumping into Red Bull.
No.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, let's talk about helicopter aerobatics. I got to tell you, when we first talked about setting this interview up, I was thinking about my incorrect preconceived notions about helicopter aerobatics. I mean, I think all of us have heard and thought it was true. Hey, you can't loop a helicopter. Obviously, something changed along the way. I did a quick research, and I found that the first loop was back in 1949. So obviously I missed some data along the way. Tell us all about that myth and why some helicopters can loop and others can't and so on.
Well, I have a couple of mentors that have taught me a lot about helicopter aerodynamics and aerobatics. And one of them is Rich Lee, who's been doing aerobatics in the United States and around the world for many, many years. He was a Boeing test pilot, and he flew the 500 series. He did an aerobatic display. And he did an aerobatic display in the AH-64, the Apache, as well.
Right.
And he says that Any helicopter can do aerobatics. It's just the envelope for error gets much, much smaller when you get away from the rigid rotor system and the systems that are built for it. Okay. So any helicopter, and the 1949 loop that you're speaking of, I saw the film of it, and it's really cool. I think it was a Sikorsky R4, and the guy does a really low loop. I think he entered it at about 70 feet AGL, which I don't do. That's crazy. But
that is crazy.
It was amazing to watch. But yeah, you have to be more careful, obviously, and it has to be done correctly, and you have to keep the right load on the rotor system. But theoretically, any helicopter could do it. I'm not going to do it in any helicopter. I'm sticking with the BO-105, but I understand it to be possible, although I've not tried it.
Well, let's talk about the BO-105. What makes it special? Because obviously people are not doing these kinds of things in other helicopters. Why this machine?
Well, there's one component that separates it from most of the other civilian helicopters, and that is it has a rigid rotor system. So that means the blades themselves absorb the aerodynamic forces of the lead and lag, which is the blades moving forward and backward in plane, and it absorbs the flapping motion. That's all done in the blade, whereas in an articulated rotor system or even a teetering rotor system, those forces are absorbed in the rotor head. Right. So we have a rigid rotor head that's milled out of a solid piece of titanium, and the only thing the blades can do at the rotor head is feather. So that gives you your pitch, your angle of attack for the blades. Everything else is absorbed. So that means you can load it from any direction. So that's how we're able to fly it. We don't sustain inverted flight. So that's kind of a key distinction. We get it upside down. Yeah, I do rolls. I do split S's and everything else. We do full loops. We do Immelmans. So the helicopter does spend a lot of time inverted during my display, but at no time do we sustain inverted flight in a level attitude. We're always kind of falling when we're upside down.
Okay, got it. Which clearly you're going to be pulling fewer Gs than some of the fixed-wing aircraft are.
Oh, yeah. I would pass out if I pulled the same Gs that Kirby Chambliss and Kevin Coleman are pulling, or Sean Tucker. Good God. I don't know how those guys do that. But my display, if I do it correctly and the wind's smooth and everything goes well, I pull about 2.5 to 3 Gs on the positive side and right around 0 on the negative side. If I have rough conditions or I make a mistake or fly sloppy, then sometimes those numbers will stretch on either side, but I'm never more than 3 Gs, maybe 3.1, and occasionally I'll get -1 on the negative side, but more than 90% of what I do is in between 0 and 2.5.
So that makes it a lot easier on you as well as on the helicopter.
It's so mellow. Whenever I take a passenger, the first thing they say is I expected that to be really bad, and it was really great.
Well, so after Helicopter News Gathering, you started a company that you're still CEO of today. Mm-hmm. What have you been doing in all those intervening years prior to getting the call from Red Bull?
The primary way that I make my living is in film and television support. So my company, that's what we do. We provide camera systems and helicopters and crews for filming. So we either fly on camera, you got the bad guys with machine guns out the doors, or we have the camera platform. So anytime you see a helicopter on screen, there's another helicopter shooting it. So usually that's us behind the scene.
Got it. The thing that really struck me is I saw a list of some of the different projects you have been doing over the years, and some of them are just mind-boggling. Stuff that you wouldn't even imagine somebody would be crazy enough to think of. Tell us about some of the more unusual or more memorable projects you've been involved in.
Oh my goodness, it's a list, and I think you have the list. But I'm so lucky to be able to have done some of the things I've done. But and a lot of those projects were with Red Bull. So my company's been a vendor for Red Bull for a number of years, and in that capacity, we worked on quite a few projects that you mentioned. One of those would be Red Bull Stratos, where Felix Baumgartner, one of our Red Bull athletes, jumped from 128,000 feet from a hot air balloon and broke the high-altitude skydive record and the free-fall speed record. He went supersonic in free fall.
Right.
Or as we always tell him, dude, you broke the sound barrier with your butt. But
that's funny.
It's funny to us. Anyway, that was a really fun project to be on because a lot of really smart people worked on a lot of very complex systems, and we had to test and prove each one and develop the pressure suit, the capsule, the free fall parachute system. Guys like Luke Aikins and Art Thompson, Charlie Rosine, these people I worked with were some of the smartest people in the world, and I got to kind of have a front row seat for about 3.5 years, and we did all the flying for it, and it was really fun, and it was really exciting to be there on that day when we broke all those records, or when Felix broke them all.
Yep. Now, the one that really captured my imagination, I went actually out and found the video. Free fall, 25,000 feet. Tell us about, this is one of those things that just defies explanation.
Okay, so we'll set it up because the free fall specialist that taught Felix a lot about free fall from altitude and at high speed was a guy named Luke Aikins, who's now really famous in his own right. But he was behind the scenes on Stratos, and he's a good friend of mine. He's a Red Bull athlete. He's one of the guys on the Red Bull Air Force. But he had an idea that he wanted to jump into an arresting device on the ground and skydive with no parachute. So that's what we did. So he jumped from 25,000 feet with no parachute and landed in a net that was 100 feet by 100 feet. So if you look at it from a daredevil standpoint, it meets all the criteria. That was insane what he did. And it was an incredible athletic feat for him to be able to steer himself into that net. But at its core, that project was really cool. We were on it for about a year, developing the net and everything else. And it was really just a math and science problem. How do you decelerate a 200-pound object from 125 miles an hour to zero in a given distance at a given G load? So we just worked the systems. We built a test sled, a little fake Luke. It was his exact surface area, body surface area, and it was his exact weight. And we dropped it into the net from a bunch of different altitudes and tested every aspect of the system. And it was really fun for me as a pilot because I was using a 500, an MD 500, and I got to drop the load of the test article into the net over and over and over again. And it was really challenging and fun. There's nothing better than pickling off a load and watching it go down. And
Bullseye.
Yeah, they started calling me Bullseye after that. Not all of them were bullseyes, but it was a successful program in the end, and it was really fun and interesting, again, to just watch how these guys test and develop systems and to be a part of it.
And I think when you see the video, which is, again, dramatic, because I guess that net was up, how high up was it?
It was 250 feet.
Yeah, and suspended by 4 different cranes, and it looked like another net below the top net.
There was a net below that really wasn't part of the system. It was just kind of there as an ultimate safety. We were kind of using the lower net as the ground. So if he touched that net, it would be, the system would have failed. And he didn't touch it until they released the system and winched him down. But the interesting part about that net, to hold the net taut, it required more surface tension than what would be acceptable for his impact. So a lot of people don't know, right before he hit the net, they released it, and the net was falling as he hit it. So there was a guy, and his name's Nick, and he had the release buttons in his hand, and he was watching Luke come down and push the buttons at the exact time. And had he been late, it would have been very, very bad for Luke.
Very
late or early. I mean, he had to get it exact perfect, and he did.
Got it.
So he had the most stressful job. I was in the air. We were tracking him come down. And it was amazing because he's my good friend too. So to watch him fall like that with no parachute was a little stressful.
I can well imagine. Wow. So let's talk about the Red Bull team. How did you get pulled into that?
They didn't have to pull me. I was banging on the door for a long time, and then it cracked open. So my predecessor was a guy named Chuck Aaron. He retired at the end of 2015. He had a 10-year safe run of awesome performances, and everybody loves him, rightly so. But he retired. He's on to other things. And when he did retire, our boss in Austria, his name's Blackie Schwartz. Well, Schwartz means black.
Schwartz,
Yeah, I don't say it right, but we all call him Blackie, and he's a great guy. He's the boss. He asked me if I wanted to do it, and I, of course, jumped at the opportunity. So then I went and trained with Blackie and with a man named Rainer Wilke, who is, I mentioned Rich Lee earlier. He's the top of the heap in America, and Rainer is absolutely the top of the heap in the rest of the world. And he was a German Army pilot and a test pilot for Eurocopter and Messerschmitt as the companies kind of evolved. But he had been doing aerobatics in the BO-105 since 1984. So that's who I learned it from. I literally learned at the knee of the master, and he taught me how to do all this. And I trained with those guys here in the States, and then we went to Europe for the spring, and I trained with them in their spring training camp, and they invited me on the team. So right now I'm the only American on the Flying Bulls team.
Bet you're having a great time.
Oh my goodness, yes.
What's the typical routine look like that you're flying here at AirVenture? Just talk people through what you do.
Okay, it's about, well, here we do something a little bit different because we do a combined show.
Okay.
My solo show is about 6 minutes long.
Okay. So let's talk about that.
Okay, so I start on the ground and I spiral up. I do a hover, a pedal turn up to my assigned show altitude, which is roughly 1,000 feet AGL, and I start the show with a backflip, which is a zero airspeed loop. So you're in an out-of-ground effect hover, zero airspeed, and you just pull max power, and then over you go. It's like falling backwards out of a chair.
Huh.
So it's a very slow to develop loop, and that's where we unload the system. So it actually, you're about 0 to sometimes half a negative G as you come over the top of that backflip. And then from there, I go into a hammerhead. I've got the sequence here somewhere. It's mostly memorized, but I do. It's as an aerobatics routine. It's fairly basic compared to what guys like Kirby Chambliss are doing, and Kevin Coleman and some of these guys that you see here at Oshkosh. Mine's very simple, and I've just been handed this by Amber. Thank you. So After the backflip, I go into a hammerhead, which is a really standard maneuver. In a helicopter, we use power and the anti-torque pedals to bring it around. And then I come into a loop at show center, and then I do a half cubanate back to show center, and then I do either one roll or two rolls, depending on the wind and the length of the show line and all that. It's kind of variable. And then I do a split S, so that's just you roll the helicopter inverted, and then you pull it around on the bottom half of the loop, and that puts you back towards show center. A couple of loops there. And then I do a move that Reiner invented very recently, and he invented it right before our spring training and taught it to me during that session, and that was in March. So I had the privilege of being the first one to perform the new maneuver in public because I had a show right after training camp. So it's called the Immel flip. So it's an Immelman that goes into an immediate backflip. So you do an Immelman, and as you roll right side up, then you pull it into a backflip and fly back down the same line in the opposite direction. So you go up and into inverted, right side up, and then back inverted and back down the other direction. Back to show center.
Okay.
And then later in the routine, we add a roll at the end of that. So you do an Immelman and a backflip and then a roll out of it. So you regain the same heading that you entered on. It's really complicated and it looks cool from the ground, but it's actually relatively easy to do.
Yeah, but we don't want people to know that.
Yeah, I didn't say that.
I mean, we're pilots, man. This is hard stuff.
Yeah, leave it to us.
And actually, I think that's an important thing for people to know who are interested in aviation. I think sometimes get the feeling that, oh gosh, this is too hard. I could never do that. But, flying is one of those things that most anybody can do if they apply themselves to it.
I say that all the time. Just about anybody who's determined can do it. There are some people where the learning curve is obviously longer and slower. As you know, you're a long-time flight instructor. But I believe that almost anybody can be taught to fly and turn loose in the air.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in fact, I usually tell folks that, the flying part's the easy part. It's the judgment. It's the decision-making.
Yes.
We can teach you the mechanics of flying to just about anyone. Mm-hmm. But boy, all the judgment, that's where it's the work.
Yeah, that's harder to teach. That's innate, I think.
So what are you doing differently here at the show? I understand you've got people with you in the helicopter when you start the show?
Oh, yeah. We have a very complicated and awesome show that we do here. We combine the whole team. So it's me and Kirby Chambliss, it's such an honor to fly with that guy. He's one of the best pilots I've ever seen in my life. He's a 5-time national champion, 2-time world champion. Just to hang around him is a huge privilege. So to get to fly with him, I can't believe it. But we do a show together. They basically give us the airbox for around 20 minutes, and I have 4 skydivers on board the helicopter. We take off, and they jump out at various altitudes, and then they interact with Kirby. So he's flying in and among the skydivers as they come down. The last skydiver is on a wingsuit, so I take him out to 6,000 feet at the end of the show box, and he flies back down the show line, and Kirby does barrel rolls around him while he's descending in his wingsuit. Yeah, I don't know how he does that.
Wow.
Every time I see it, I'm looking out the window going, this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing that every day. And then when he lands, by then I've descended and I come back into the show line. And as I enter the show box, then Kirby does barrel rolls around me,
right?
Which is exciting from my perspective. And then I start my routine. I'm in there for about 4.5, 5 minutes doing my thing. And then as I finish, Kirby rolls in and finishes the show with a grand finale that only Kirby could do.
Wow.
Yeah, the whole thing's about 20 minutes, and you see 3 different disciplines of aviation, and it's really fun.
So I'm getting thirsty as you tell me about this. What did you bring here with you?
Oh, well, I always carry one of these with me. This is a Red Bull. Very refreshing, energizing beverage. Thank you.
And so do you drink it before, during, or after the show, or all?
All 3. Red Bull gives you wings, right?
Super. Now, I saw your predecessor. He had a routine where he had a glass of water and so on. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Well, that's the Bob Hoover maneuver, right?
Exactly,
to prove that you're holding 1G throughout the maneuver, he would pour the tea, and he had to pour it backhanded so the camera could see it and all that. Bob Hoover's a legend. I don't know how he did that, and honestly, I'm not there yet. When I do a roll, I unload just a little bit, so that would make a mess if I tried that.
Okay.
Ask me next year. We'll see if I can do that.
Got it. All right. So I'll look forward to the video of you pouring the Red Bull as you're.
I'm not going to make any promises right here and paint myself into a corner, but I will try it.
You don't want to mess up that helicopter either. So.
Yeah, I prefer a tighter roll, which the barrel roll carves a big circle through the air. It's kind of a loop and a roll combined. But what would normally be called an aileron roll is I like those because it just looks so neat down the show line. So when you do those, as you know, you're unloaded a little bit on top. So that would make a mess if I tried to drink Red Bull while I was doing one of those.
Indeed. So let me ask you, Art, in your current job here, are you having fun?
Oh my goodness, this is the greatest job. I couldn't have dreamed this up. This is so cool. This is my first time at Oshkosh, and to be here as a performer, it's just it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much I want to see and do, and I know so many people here, and I'm surprised every time I come around the corner. There's some familiar face. It's really great.
Yeah, it is so much fun, both being at AirVenture and being in aviation. So anything for folks who are listening, who are driving in their cars to work right now, and they're not in aviation, what would you suggest to them?
Wow. Well, come by and try this. Join the aviation community. But, it's funny. Not everybody's into aviation, and I understand that. But it can be something that inspires anything else in your life. Right? I say, well, Red Bull gives you wings. Well, for me, that means I get to go do loops in a helicopter in front of a huge crowd, and it's a massive thrill. But that really can mean whatever your inspiration is. Go visit your grandma. Go see your sick friend. Go do something with that time. Turn the TV off for a little bit and go out and do that thing you've always wanted to do. Hopefully it's aviation. We need more people in aviation, and I want this plant this seed in everybody. But if it's not, there's got to be something out there that gets you excited, and whatever that is, go chase that.
Well, it's certainly been a great second career for me, and I've talked to a lot of people who've said, "Oh gosh, I want to do that," or many who've actually made the jump. So it's never too late.
Never. Yeah. I'm getting my kids into it now. They're going to get a way huge head start compared to what I had, but it's never too late. I know people late in life that have picked it up and became great pilots.
Yeah. So where do people go to find more information about you and your business in Los Angeles and the Red Bull team?
Well, the Red Bull team, you'd go to theflyingbulls.com or .at. That's the Austrian website. Either one of those work. Click the language you want, whether it's German or English. And all the information about the Flying Bulls is on there. And then my company is called Airborne Images. I named it that because it's 82nd Airborne, so Airborne Images, a little double entendre there.
Of course.
And it's just airborneimages.com.
Right, that's perfect. That's good. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome meeting you.
Oh, what an honor to sit here with you.
Have a great show. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Aaron. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I am back here in the home studio, and I expect we'll be getting back to the regular weekly news show next week, but I hope you've enjoyed these interviews in the meantime. And I do want to mention we have a question of the month that I'm still looking for answers for. So I would like to hear from you. What did you learn after you got your private certificate that, you kind of wish you'd learned before you got your private, perhaps in pilot training? So in other words, what kind of surprises did you encounter or things that you have to learn after the fact? So far, I've only got a couple responses, so please put your thinking caps on. Think about what you learned after you got your private that would have been helpful to know before you were out there flying around on your own. And let's get those into me by August 11th. You can either send an audio recording, just go ahead and go to aviationnewstalk.com and click on listener question, and you can record it there or use voice memo on your phone and email that to me. Or you can just pick up the phone and call 650-967-2500 and leave a recording there for me, or send an email. And also, if you think that someday you might be buying a new or slightly used Cirrus, please contact me now. I had a couple people come up to me at AirVenture who listened to the show, told me they were planning to fly Cirruses, and I'm already in the process of helping them. So if you're thinking you might get a new or used Cirrus, call me as soon as possible. I specialize in the Cirrus, work with people around the country. And as I always ask, please take a moment to think of one or two of your friends who you think will enjoy the show. If only you were to tell them about it. And then contact them later today and tell them how they can find this podcast. And they're not familiar with what podcasts are, well, just send them out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, and they can download our dedicated podcast app by just searching for Aviation News Talk. Until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.